Welcome to Life Stories Network, where real emotions and unforgettable journeys unfold. Today's story is about family, rejection, and resilience. It begins with a Thanksgiving invitation that never came, and it ends in a way my family never saw coming. Thanksgiving was always a big deal in my family. Growing up, it was one of the few times when everyone came together, no matter what drama had been brewing during the year. The table would be full of food, laughter, and sometimes arguments that only families could have. But this year was different. For the first time in my life, I didn't get an invitation. No call, no text, nothing. And I didn't even find out directly from them. My cousin slipped up in a group chat, mentioning how excited everyone was to meet at my sister's house. I stared at that message for a long time, my chest tight, realizing they had purposely left me out. It wasn't just the holiday that hurt. It was what it meant. It was a clear message that I wasn't wanted. After everything I had done for them, after all the times I had been there, this was how they decided to treat me. I tried to convince myself that maybe it was a mistake, maybe they assumed I was busy. But deep down, I knew the truth. They didn't want me there. My success, my life choices, and maybe even my wealth had put a wall between us. Instead of being proud, they resented me. I still remember sitting alone that night in my kitchen, staring at the empty calendar where Thanksgiving should have been marked. I had built a life for myself. A $6.2 million estate with acres of land, a house that looked like it belonged in a magazine, and a career that gave me financial freedom most people only dream about. But at that moment, none of it mattered. I felt like a child again, unwanted, left out of the circle that was supposed to be my safe place. The anger came later. First was sadness, then confusion, then anger. And I made a decision. If they didn't want me at their table, I would build my own. I wasn't going to sit in silence and let them win by making me feel small. No, I was going to show them that I could celebrate Thanksgiving in a way they could never imagine. Not out of revenge, but out of self-respect. Out of the need to remind myself that I still belonged somewhere, even if it wasn't with them. So I got to work. I started by calling a few close friends who had become more like family to me over the years. People who supported me without jealousy. People who celebrated my wins and held me during my losses. And then I went further. I reached out to neighbors, to colleagues who had nowhere to go, even to a few strangers I met through a local shelter who didn't have family of their own. My estate had room. My heart had room. Why not fill it? The preparations began a week before Thanksgiving. I hired chefs, decorators, and staff to help bring the vision to life. My dining room, already massive, was transformed into something out of a dream. Long tables draped with golden cloth, candles flickering in glass holders, flowers arranged with such care that they looked like art. I walked through the space the night before, feeling both nervous and excited. For once, this wasn't about proving anything to my family. It was about creating a moment of belonging. A sanctuary for people who knew the pain of being forgotten. The morning of Thanksgiving came, and instead of waking up with dread, I woke up with purpose. The estate came alive with energy. Guests arrived slowly at first, then in groups, each one greeted with warmth and genuine joy. I watched as people who didn't know each other sat down and began to share stories, laughter, and even tears. Some had lost loved ones. Some had been rejected by their families like me, and some were simply looking for connection in a world that often felt cold. By the time the last guest arrived, there were 32 people sitting at my table. 32 souls who, like me, deserved to feel seen, heard, and valued. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses filled the air, and for the first time in weeks, I felt light again. Not because I had outdone my family, but because I had found something deeper. I had built a family out of love, not obligation. As I stood at the head of the table, raising my glass, I felt tears sting my eyes. To belonging, I said, my voice breaking. To creating our own traditions when the old ones no longer fit. To choosing each other. The room erupted in cheers, and I knew in that instant that this Thanksgiving would stay with me forever. But the story didn't end there. Word travels fast in families, especially mine. Photos from the dinner were shared online, and it wasn't long before my siblings saw them. I didn't post out of spite, but out of gratitude. Yet when they saw, their reaction was exactly what I expected. My phone lit up with messages. some angry, some curious, and some filled with fake concern. "Why didn't you tell us? You could have come if you wanted. You're being dramatic." Each one cut like a knife, but I didn't let them take away the peace I had created. Inside, I knew the truth. They didn't want me until they saw what I had built without them, and by then it was too late. The morning after Thanksgiving, I woke up with a strange sense of calm. My estate was quiet again, the decorations still glowing faintly from the night before. I walked into the dining room and saw the remnants of joy: empty glasses, folded napkins, half-finished pies, and a few candles that had burned down to nothing. It wasn't a mess. It was proof that something beautiful had happened here. Proof that 32 people had sat together and created memories none of us would forget. I poured myself a cup of coffee and stood by the window, looking out over the acres of land that I had worked so hard for. For years, this house had been just a symbol of success, something I had built to show myself I had made it. But after last night, it felt different. It felt alive. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was home. Of course, the peace didn't last. By mid-morning, my phone buzzed with a flood of notifications. At first, I ignored them. I wanted to hold on to the happiness for as long as I could, but curiosity got the better of me, and I finally opened my messages. My sister was the first. Her text read, "So you threw a whole Thanksgiving dinner without telling anyone? You made us look terrible." I stared at the words, feeling that old, familiar sting in my chest. It wasn't about me being hurt or me being excluded. It was about how they looked. Then came my brother's call. I let it ring, but he didn't give up. When I finally picked up, his voice was sharp. "Why would you do that? Why would you make a show of yourself like that online? You're trying to embarrass us." His words spilled out, and I realized something I hadn't seen before. They weren't angry because I had been hurt. They were angry because I had chosen not to stay quiet about it. I let him talk, then calmly said, "I didn't do it for you. I did it for me, and for everyone at that table who needed a place to belong." There was silence on the other end. The kind of silence that tells you the truth landed harder than you expected. He muttered something about me being dramatic and hung up. The next few days were a storm. My mother called, her tone a mix of guilt and defensiveness. She said things like, "You know how your sister is," and "It wasn't personal." But how could it not be personal? When your own family decides you don't belong at the table, what could be more personal than that? I listened quietly, then finally told her, "I'm not angry anymore, but I won't pretend it didn't hurt." For once, she didn't have an answer. Meanwhile, messages from the people who had come to my estate kept pouring in. Thank you notes, photos, and stories about how much that dinner meant to them. One woman wrote, "It was the first time in years I felt like I was part of something bigger than myself." Another said, "I didn't think I'd laugh this much again after losing my parents." Their words touched me in ways my family's never could. They were strangers when they arrived, but they left as something closer to family. The contrast was sharp. On one side, my blood relatives, more concerned with appearances than feelings. On the other, these people who had no obligation to me, who showed nothing but gratitude and warmth. And it made me realize something. Family isn't just about blood. It's about who shows up for you when you need them. It's about who makes space for you at the table, even when there's no room. But the story didn't stop with just messages. A few of my family members started showing up at my estate. My cousin came first, trying to smooth things over. "You know they didn't mean it," she said, her voice soft. I smiled, offered her tea, and listened. But deep down, I knew it wasn't about meaning it or not. It was about choice. They had chosen not to include me. That was the part I couldn't ignore. Then my sister came. The same sister who had hosted Thanksgiving without me. She stood at my front door, looking small in a way I hadn't seen since we were kids. "Can we talk?" she asked. I let her in, but the air between us was heavy. She started with excuses, how the house wasn't big enough for everyone, how they thought I'd be busy, how they didn't want to impose. Each reason felt thinner than the last, and I could see even she didn't believe them. Finally, she dropped her guard. "The truth is, it's hard to be around you sometimes. You've done so well, and it makes the rest of us feel less." Her voice cracked on that last word. For a moment, I almost felt guilty. Almost. But then I thought about all the nights I had worked, all the sacrifices I had made, all the times I had supported them without hesitation. And I realized I didn't owe anyone an apology for succeeding. I told her gently, "I never wanted to make you feel small, but I also won't shrink myself to make you comfortable. That's not love, that's control." She looked at me with tears in her eyes, and for once she didn't have a comeback. She just nodded and left. That night I sat outside on my patio, the cold air wrapping around me. I thought about everything that had happened, the pain, the joy, the lessons, and it hit me. Being uninvited was the best thing that could have happened. If they had included me, I never would have opened my home to those 32 people. I never would have felt the kind of gratitude that only comes from giving without expecting anything in return. My family had shut me out, but life had opened a door I didn't even know existed. And in that space, I found something far more powerful than acceptance. I found freedom. In the weeks after Thanksgiving, things settled into a strange rhythm. My family's anger quieted down, replaced by silence. I didn't hear from most of them, and for the first time, I didn't chase after them either. I stopped being the one to bridge the gap, to make peace, to shrink myself so they could feel bigger. It was uncomfortable at first, but then I realized it was freedom. I threw myself into the relationships that truly mattered. The people who had sat at my table kept in touch. We organized small dinners, movie nights, and even volunteered together at a local shelter. Something that had started out as a single Thanksgiving dinner turned into a community, a chosen family. And for the first time, I felt what real belonging was supposed to feel like. But the ripple effects of that night didn't end there. One day, a local journalist reached out. She had heard about the dinner and wanted to do a feature on it. At first, I hesitated. The last thing I wanted was to turn my personal life into a headline. But then I thought about those 32 people and what it meant for them to be seen. So I agreed. The article came out a week later, titled, "The Thanksgiving Table That Welcomed Everyone." It painted a picture of inclusion, generosity, and healing. And it wasn't about me. It was about us. When my family read the article, I knew it hit them hard. This wasn't me showing off wealth or success. This was me showing what real connection looked like, something they had failed to give me. And suddenly the dynamic shifted. Calls came in again. Invitations to come over for dinner sometime started appearing. My siblings wanted to visit. My mother wanted to reconnect. On the surface, it looked like an olive branch. But I had learned something important. Not every invitation needs to be accepted. The truth is, I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even bitter. But I had outgrown the version of myself that begged for a seat at their table. I had built my own, and it was full. And when I looked around at the people sitting there, I didn't feel less than. I didn't feel small. I felt whole. Still, life has a way of testing the lessons you think you've learned. A month later, Christmas came around. Once again, I didn't get an invitation. This time, though, I didn't wait for it. Instead, I hosted my own Christmas dinner. The same faces showed up, along with a few new ones. Neighbors brought dishes, kids ran through the halls, and the sound of carols filled the estate. I didn't feel left out. I felt chosen. That night, one of my guests pulled me aside. She was a single mother who had been at Thanksgiving too. With tears in her eyes, she said, "You have no idea what this means for us. For people like me who don't have anywhere else to go, you've given us back the holidays." Her words stayed with me long after the night ended. It was bigger than me now. This wasn't just about proving myself to my family. This was about creating a space for people who had been forgotten. The irony is, the more I focused on building this new family, the less power my old one had over me. Their silence no longer hurt. Their absence no longer felt like rejection. It simply felt like a choice, one that I no longer needed to chase. And with every gathering, every shared laugh, every story told around the table, I realized that being uninvited had been the greatest gift they could have given me. Looking back now, I see it clearly. They thought excluding me would make me feel small, but it only made me grow bigger. They thought leaving me out would break me, but it only made me stronger. And while they sat at their table, bound by resentment and appearances, I sat at mine, surrounded by gratitude, joy, and love. If I could go back, would I change anything? Honestly, no, because that pain gave me clarity. It showed me who really stood by me and who only wanted me when it was convenient. It taught me that blood doesn't guarantee loyalty, and that family is something you build, not something you're automatically given. So now, every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every holiday, my estate is open. Not just for friends, but for anyone who needs a place to belong. 32 people grew to 40, then 50, and now it's become a tradition. My house is no longer just an estate. It's a refuge. A reminder that no matter how many times life uninvites you, you can always create your own table. To anyone who's ever felt left out, forgotten, or unwanted, I want you to hear this. You don't need their approval to be enough. You don't need their seat to have a table. You can build your own, and the people who truly value you will find their way there. That's the lesson my family accidentally gave me, and I'll never forget it. And maybe, one day they'll understand what they lost when they chose to close the door on me. But until then, I'll keep mine wide open. Because the truth is, I didn't just feed 32 people that night. I fed myself something far greater: peace.